I read an article by Eileen Wright, and she talked about she was watching TV one day, and her favorite television pastor told this amazing story. She was so impressed with it, she wrote it down. She shared it with the rest of us. And she talked about this pastor that she liked so much over 26 years ago, had been visiting New Orleans. He was in a convenience store, and then an interesting thing happened. He got his stuff. He was standing in line behind a family of three. This family of three was starting to look a little bit restless, and mom and dad were realizing they did not have enough money to pay for the milk and the small quantity of food that they had just purchased. This pastor saw what was going on. He put some bills in his hand. He laid them on the man's shoulder, put his hand there and said, "Sir, you don't even need to look at me. Please take this money." The man reached up, took the money, paid for the stuff, and left. That was over 26 years ago. 9 years later, he's back in New Orleans. He's a guest speaker in a big church. He's finished speaking. Many people have wanted to talk with him. He signed some books that he'd written. He's taking care of all of that. And there's not many people standing around. They're engaged talking with each other. And somebody walks up and says, "Sir, could I tell you an amazing story about how I came to know Christ?" He said, "Yeah, I would love to hear that." And this man starts telling the story that 9 years before, he and his wife were absolutely destitute. They'd lost their home. They'd lost all of their money. They were living out of their car with a young son. And they had made a pact that they were going to end their lives. They didn't know God. They didn't have a reason to go on. The pain was more than they could bear much longer. And they had driven to a cliff, and they were talking about the last moments of their life. And they decided, as good parents, they really should give this child a last meal. So they backed up from the cliff. They went to the convenience store. They went in, they were going to buy some food. They didn't have enough money for it. And the man said, "I was standing in a line and I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it kind of made a crumply, rattling sound like paper." And somebody said, "You don't even need to turn around and look. Just please take the money. Jesus loves you." And he said, "We went back after we bought our groceries back to that cliff, and we sat there and we cried for the next 4 hours. And we realized we can't kill our child, and we can't kill ourselves and leave him behind." So they didn't kill themselves. The next week, they were driving down the highway in the area. They saw a little stand, a sign out in front of a little church. It said, "Jesus loves you." They remembered what the man said. They said, "Let's go to this church on Sunday." They went. They gave their lives to Christ. They raised their child in that church, and their lives got remarkably better from that point forward. He said, "Sir, I knew when I heard that voice with that South African accent, I would never, ever forget it. When you started speaking today, I thought, oh my gosh, that's the voice of the hand on the shoulder. And I want you to know, sir, by giving us that gift, you saved 3 lives, not only for this world, but for the next. Thank you so very much." This pastor understood the joy and the blessings and the benefits of giving. I get excited about giving. I try not to go past 2 today. I love this stuff. And it's just coming back to me again and again and again how much God blesses us when we learn to give. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 6 today. We're going to start with verses 1 through 4. That's all we're going to cover. But let me bring you up to speed on what's going on with this. Jesus, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Mount, I think, is the best of Jesus. It took us, I think 4 or 5 months just to get through the first part of it, chapter 5. We're just now starting chapter 6. There is so much industrial strength truth in this. I just love it. Now, Jesus is starting part of this sermon. he wants people to realize that God does not respect hypocrisy. God's not looking on the outside, he's looking at the inside. Most of us spend our lives trying to clean up the outside, hoping nobody will know what's on the inside. We call that hypocrisy today. It took me a long time to realize God is a lot more concerned with what's going on inside of me than outside of me. And if I will clean up the inside with his help, he will clean up the outside for me and it will get a whole lot better. So Jesus is starting here. He's going to talk about three different things. He's going to talk about acts of righteousness. And when he talks about these, the first one he talks about is giving. And then he talks about prayer. And then he talks about fasting, because giving has to do with how we relate to other human beings. Prayer is about how we relate to God, and fasting is how we deal with ourselves and clean up our flesh just a little bit. So he's going to talk about this and how God doesn't like the hypocrisy that has started coming with it. You see, over hundreds of years, God had manifested himself in many ways to the people, teaching them how to live. He gave them the 10 Commandments. Then they expanded the 10 Commandments to 613 rules and regulations. And they were weighting the people down, and they kept lowering the bar that God set till they got it down low enough that they could feel good about themselves. Okay, I haven't murdered anybody. I'm a pretty good person. I haven't committed adultery. I'm a pretty good person. I don't really lie. I might deceive, but I don't lie. So I'm a pretty good person. And Jesus is trying to raise the bar back up where God set it. And the only way we ever reach that bar is with God's help. But it's human nature. We'd rather do it ourselves. We don't like to be dependent, especially in Texas. We don't like anybody telling us what to do. We were raised to be independent, to be self-sufficient. But Jesus said, no, there's a better way for you to live, but you have to have God's help. You have to depend on him. So let's put the bar back where God intended, where it's more about the love than it is about the law. It's more about the relationships than it's about the rules. So that's where we are now. This is what the scripture says, Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So I don't want any of us to miss the rewards of God. And we can sacrifice those rewards with our hypocrisy. I want to talk about this passage just a little bit. It says, thus when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets. What in the world does that mean? That was a long time ago. When I read the historians, they explain this to us. Once upon a time, this word hypocrite was comparable to actor. The original word for hypocrite in the Greek language was somebody who was an actor. And they would hold a mask in front of their face. They may come in from this side and they're one character. They'll exit, they'll come in from this side, one person with a different mask. So a hypocrite was somebody like being on stage. They were acting like somebody they weren't. That word has morphed into a negative terminology. It's somebody who's phony. It's somebody who's fake. It's somebody who's not the real deal. Scripture's clear. Man looks on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. When he talked about trumpets, the historians tell us that some of the religious leaders, when they were walking down the street, they would toot their horns. They had a little trumpet. They'd blow the little trumpet, and the poor people would hear the trumpet and think, oh, Oh, a free handout's coming. And they'd surround these religious leaders and they would give them their alms. And everybody saw it because they were blowing their own horns. When they got to the synagogue, usually at the doors of the synagogue, there'd be something that looked like a trumpet. It looked like a horn. It was big at the top, small at the bottom, usually made out of brass. And when they put their money in, it made noise. You can imagine dropping a bunch of pennies in those. You can imagine bringing 100 pennies and slowly pouring them in. You get all this clatter going down, or you could have a larger coin and throw it a little bit hard, make a lot of noise. When we were kids, you know how children watch adults and learn so much from them. We knew everybody's watching, so the plate would go by, and we'd thump it real loud so it looked like we put some $50 in and pass it on. Got in a little bit of trouble when I put a bill in one day, one of my buddies in the middle of the road that the ushers couldn't get to him from either end. I put in, I think, maybe a 20. He took it out, put it in his pocket, passed the plate. Those ushers came after us so fast, and we explained it's just a joke. Just want to see if you guys are paying attention. Didn't mean it. But it's human nature to just try to look better than we are. And Jesus said, hey, don't settle for that. Put the bar back up there. Be the best. Be the real deal. So what we're looking at today is we're going to try to answer 4 questions because giving keeps you in the cycle of God's blessing. Bless you, bless you. I just happen to have tissues nearby. Yes, ma'am. So we look at that. We're going to look at what to give. We're going to look at how to give. We're going to look at to whom to give. And we're going to look at why to give today. I'm excited about this. Just studying this, just preparing for this really made a big difference. Just to be a little bit transparent, this last year was really bad. I lost more financially this year than I've ever lost in my life for a number of different reasons. I've given more this year because I believe in giving. I mean, when I look back at how much I gave this year, it's like, that was a lot. That was especially a lot this year, but I'm just convinced that giving does things for us. There are 4 ways, at least in the Bible, that talks about giving. Of course, there's the tithe. In my opinion, that's required. Malachi 3:10. It says, test me in this, says the Lord. This is the only time I can think of where God says, test me. Most times it don't test the Lord your God. He said, test me in this. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. See if I won't throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out more blessing than you have room to store. And I will rebuke the devourer. That's a pretty big promise. So I think tithing is mandatory, but a lot of theologians say, no, you're not under the law in the New Testament. It doesn't matter. You don't have to. You should probably give more than 10%. I'm going to go to Jesus because I think he encourages to continue tithing. Matthew 23:23. This is what he has to say. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, like justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done. What are these? Tithing your dill, your mint, and your cumin, without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. So they're at home being very religious. They're looking at their mint leaves, and they've got 30 mint leaves, so they're going to give 3 to God. They're going to take it to the priest. They've got their dill. Dill seeds are really little, but they're counting them all out so they can give God his 10%. I don't even know what cumin is or looks like. I've seen it on the shelf. It's got a label that says C-U-M-I-N. I don't even know where it came from. but it was small, it was tiny. And Jesus said, you're looking at these small, tiny, relatively insignificant things, but you should do that. But don't neglect things like justice and mercy and faithfulness. So tithing is one way to give. We're going to focus today on giving alms. If you look at Matthew 6:1 in different translations, some of them will say when you're giving alms, others say when you're giving to the needy, to the poor. Well, the same root word in the Greek language for alms meant giving to the needy and the poor. So if it says when you're giving your alms, it's talking about when you're giving to the needy and to the poor. Another way of giving is first fruits. People don't practice that because it's complicated. Back in the old days, everybody would take first fruits offerings to the priest at the beginning of the season of harvest. Let's say you got a peach tree. That first peach you get, you take the very first peach. When it's perfect and ripe, you pull it off the tree, you take it to the priest, you lay it down and say, I got a peach tree. Would you bless the rest of my harvest? And you might get 20 bushels of peaches off that tree. He blessed the first one. You get the harvest, and now you know you got 1 peach and 20 bushels, so you owe God 2 bushels as the tithe. First fruits comes at the beginning of the harvest, and you don't know how much to tithe until you get it. So that's tricky. How do you figure out first fruits for today? From my experience, I learned about this, and I'm trusting that God is retroactive. So when I left big churches after 20 years, I knew how much I charged for the first counseling session I ever had that I charged. I took that to somebody who's a priest in my life. They understood first fruits. I laid it at their feet. It was a couple, and they blessed it for me. Well, when I started doing attraction coaching, the first check I collected, I didn't know about first fruits then, but when I learned about them, I took that amount to somebody, asked them to bless it. When I started trading Bitcoin, I thought, this is going to be fun. I never traded Bitcoin. The thing I like, you can trade 7 days a week, 24/7. It's fun. I'm a trader. I like fast, so I can just snag a little bit, just a little bit. I would buy on dips and sell on peaks. Just sat there in front of the computer for about 4 hours, made $900 and something. And I sent it to a friend in Nashville that was in need, who has had a priestly role in my life. Blew her away. She didn't know it was coming. That was a first fruit. Since then, if I've got time, it's not my calling, but if I want to sit down and be glued to the computer and with cryptos, don't go to the bathroom. Don't take your eye. They move that fast. But if I'll stay there, I can always pick up some extra change. It's just one of those things. God's blessed me with that. So you've got tithes, first fruits, giving to the poor, and then there's sowing seeds. Now, watch out for the TV evangelist. I remember I was in seminary. We were driving back to Dallas from our day at seminary, and we're listening to one of the big TV evangelists. And he said, we have just got this new satellite television series, and you need this in your home. It's going to cost you a couple $100 a month, but you can bring me into your home all day long. If you need to sell one of your cars, you should do this. Sow the seed. And if anybody will send in $100 now, you'll get 1,000-fold return. Be careful with those guys, especially it's for them. But if God puts it on your heart to trust him more, you might just sow seeds. You might just give because, God, I understand what you're teaching. If I plant a sunflower seed, I'll probably get a sunflower plant with many seeds. If I plant a cherry seed, I'll get a cherry tree with lots of cherries. If I plant a dollar seed, it'll come back too. That's how God taught. You look at the Bible, it was an agricultural world. And we're in a different world now. But you can figure these different things out. We're going to focus on giving alms, giving to the poor. So we look at that. First question we're going to try to answer is what to give. Let's go to Luke 6:38. But I'm going to back up to 37. I'm going to muddy the waters just a little bit because I know we all have some of the similar questions. In this passage, Jesus says, judge not, and you will not be judged. Contemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Now, I read that because I have a tendency to, I'm better than I've ever been, but I see people standing on the corner with a sign that had been there for a long time. I judge them. I condemn them. I don't forgive them for not getting a job, for bothering me, for staring at me, for making me feel bad when they come up and look in like, can you give me something? I don't have anything. That's why I think Jesus prefaced with that. Maybe you give something to a homeless person. They may buy alcohol. They may buy drugs. Don't judge them. Don't condemn them. Forgive them and love them. It's between you and God what you give. We're going to be talking about how we should give, but on the what, give everything good. This is where Jesus gives us that preface, and then he says in verse 38, give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. You know, when we were talking about living a life of non-resistance, Jesus said, hey, somebody asks you for money, give it to them. Somebody asks you for your cloak, ask you for your shirt, give them your shirt, give them the cloak on your back. Somebody asks you to go a mile, go the second mile. He said, give to those who ask of you. That's tough. We think I could go bankrupt if I got around too many people that all wanted me to give them something. But this is the principle. When you give, God sees you giving for the right reasons, to the right causes, to the right people, to the poor, to the needy. He's going to bless you, and he's going to multiply your giving back to you. It's right there, words of Jesus. And it's going to be a very, very good return. So that's what we give. Anything. That's a double-edged sword too. Think about this. Some people need $1. Give it to them. Some people need a smile. Give it to them. People need somebody just to stop and listen and treat them like they're important and just listen to them. We all need an encouraging word. We all need love. So you can give tangibles and intangibles. I remember in high school, there were all kinds of just different groups of people. But I noticed in the hippie culture, they were the most generous people. If they had dope, man, they'd share it with you. It was the nature of the culture. They were giving, they were loving, they gave. Some of the other groups were kind of snooty, couldn't get into their group, couldn't break into, they wouldn't give you anything. So it's just a blessed thing. It's more blessed to give than to receive. So when you want to bless yourself, see if you can shift out of the receiving into the giving mode. This is what to give. Everything good. Whatever somebody needs, if you can help them, you will be blessed in giving it to them. The next thing after what to give is how to give. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul says the point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he's decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver. The first 20 years of my ministry, I wish I hadn't done this, I became very good at using guilt, fear, and shame to motivate people. I've kind of shifted from that more to the love side. If we're given reluctantly or under compulsion, we're going to miss the rewards of God. Personal opinion, when somebody passes the plate, everybody's kind of watching. If nobody puts anything in plate, you'll feel better than if everybody put something in plate and you didn't. There's some compulsion. I used to be close to people who knew about the inner workings of Gateway Church. Robert Morris started that church. He wrote a book on giving, and he is a giver. I mean, he got the revelation on giving. I think he gave 2 cars away. God told him and his wife, give your car away. They gave the first one away. It put them down to 1 car, but it wasn't any cash out of pocket. The second car they gave away, I think he still owed about 2 years of payments on it. God told him to give it. He did. I think he gave away 2 or 3 houses, homes to other people. He really is a giver. From what I've heard, Gateway 10 years ago gave $30 million to world missions, something they didn't expect to get any tangible results about, but they as a church believe in giving. I haven't been there in a long, long time, but they didn't pass a plate. And you had to ask somebody, if I wanted to give this church, where would I do it? Say, there's some boxes in the foyer outside of the church. Just look, it'll say for offerings. You can drop your money in. There's some envelopes. If you need a tax credit, fill the envelope, put your money in that. You can leave it in the box. We don't ask you for your money here. This is a great joy. I can talk to you guys about money, and there will not be an offering taken at the end of this service. It's in my bylaws. I'm corrupt. I know it. When I started this ministry, I put it in my bylaws that we'll never ask you for money. That's probably the one thing that people who don't like church, you ask them, why don't you like church? Usually the number one thing is that they're always asking for your money. I'm so blessed to be with you. We don't pay rent here. I like to give the church some money at the end of the year because they've turned on the light, air conditioning, spent money on us, but they gave it to us freely. I want them to be rewarded for that, but I don't need your time. I don't need your energy. I don't need your resources, so we can just talk about what God really says about giving in the Bible, and you don't have to sweat it because you're not going to be compelled to give at the end of this. So we look at this wonderful passage. The point is, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give, this is how to give, as he has decided in his heart. How do you give? Bountifully, generously, from the heart. For God loves a cheerful giver. Cheerfully, give cheerfully. If you're reluctant, you don't get the reward for it. It's got to be cheerful. And God is able, listen to the word all. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, he has distributed freely. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way, to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. Now, we ask the question, well, to whom should you give? I just read to you in verse 9, he has distributed freely. He has given to the poor. So we need to give to the poor. Psalm 41. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. You want to be blessed? Consider the poor. How might that come about? You might just consider those people. Gosh, we had some cold weather down into the lower teens not long ago. I considered the poor people. the people on the street, the people who didn't have enough cover, who couldn't get dry because it was so miserable. When I go to the gas pump, used to, gosh, I started buying gasoline when it was in the teens. It was 13 cents, 14 cents, 15 cents a gallon. Now, 50, 60, 70, $80 to fill up an SUV. Some of you more than that. And I'm thinking, how do the people who live on the outskirts where the rent is lower and have to drive into Dallas 30 or 40 miles every day, how are they making it? How are they paying rent and buying gas? And what life must be like for them. Just consider the poor. Now, watch when you consider the poor, all the blessings God has for you. In the day of trouble. Now, if you give, your troubles will not go away. I want to be very clear there. You will still have trouble. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble, but I have overcome the world. So trouble will come, but this is what God does. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. The Lord protects him and keeps him alive. He is called blessed in the land. And do not give him up to the will of his enemies. The Lord sustains him on his sick bed. And in illness, you restore him to full health. God's got this thing going on for the poor. There's a blessing in giving to the poor. Let me tell you a story. Years ago in Santa Fe, had a dear friend, Missy Lukens. She started to come to Bible studies that we were doing over at Munger Place. This was a long time ago. And the first time I ever visited with her after a Bible study, she came up and said, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person. I didn't know there were people like me that hear from God all the time. And she saw the prophetic ministry, said, oh my gosh, I think I found my tribe. I've been a devout Christian for a long time, but I just didn't find people like me. And she'd recently moved to Dallas, so she plugged in. She was a high-ranking executive with a big Fortune 50 company. And she lived in Dallas and came to Bible studies at 10 o'clock. Then she came on Wednesday nights. She came for a long time, and then God told her, give up your corporate job, move to Santa Fe. So she obeyed. So cool. Had a prophetic word for her in a Bible study that I saw a 7-Eleven company. And I can't remember the details. She wrote it down. She knows what it was. But I saw a 7-Eleven, and I just said, you're going to be doing something with the 7-Eleven companies. Well, she got a huge promotion, went to work for the Southland Corporation. She left that job. She obeyed God. She went to Santa Fe. It was kind of a wilderness experience for her, and yet a time of great spiritual growth. When she came back to Dallas without a job, her old boss at the Southland Company gave her another job that was more than she was making when she left 3 years before. That's the favor. She understands giving. But we were in Santa Fe. We had listened to some live music on Sunday afternoon, and we'd headed to the plaza. We walked over the plaza. We wanted some ice cream. So we go into the Haagen-Dazs ice cream store. It's one of those narrow stores that's deep. And it's just like you've got the workers, you've got this long bar that's filled with barrels of ice cream. There were many flavors there. And she was in the back of the building. I was up the front. I was slowly perusing all the ice cream. And this young man looked to be about 20, 21, came up and said, sir, would you allow me the privilege of buying your ice cream tonight? And I said, well, heck yeah. That'd be a good Bible study. Never turn down free ice cream. So I let this young guy buy my ice cream. I'm keeping an eye on Missy. She's at the other end of the bar. And she's talking to a young lady down there. It looks like they're engaged. And I see Missy points at me. And I know they're talking about me. And she found out that girl was a summer staffer at Glorieta. Well, summer of 75, 76, I was a summer staffer at Glorieta. It's about 20 miles from Santa Fe. So these are good kids working at a Christian encampment coming to town to do evangelism. Missy and I were the worst prospects they could have found. we've been saved for a long time. We know God really, really, really well. We can answer all the diagnostic questions perfectly for them. And so Missy and this young lady come up. These two kids buy our ice cream. She bought hers, he bought mine. We eat our ice cream. They got two more friends they need to catch up with. I said, I'd love to meet your friends. I love Glorietta staffers. So we met the friends. We went into the plaza. We're right at the middle, sitting on the fountain. We just had the four of them sit down there. Missy's very prophetic. She just went down the road, had a word for all four of them. Two of them were in tears. It went so straight to the heart. Well, by the time she's so much faster than I am, by the time she finished, I'd had some time to think and pray and ask God, went back down, had something for each one of them. Then I say, hey, something cool's happening here. You guys are out doing God's work. You're poor. I've been a summer staffer. They pay you the lowest amount that the law will amount. You have the best time of your life, but you're not going to get rich. Just barely enough. It costs a lot to drive into Santa Fe. Thank you for two $8 scoops of ice cream. We appreciate that very much. I knew they sacrificed, but God had told me it was right after I'd finished teaching in May and was going for my annual 20-day sabbatical in Santa Fe. God said, take some $100 bills with you. I want you to bless some people. Well, some people had given me some offerings. I had some $100. I had about $5 in my pocket. And God said, give it to these guys. So I just went down the road and said, because you've been so generous, so faithful, you've listened to God, He's going to bless you. Here's $100 for you and you and you and you. I'll never miss that. To me, that's significant amount of money, but I know in the big picture, I'm not going to miss it. And God has given it back to me many, many times over. But they were so blessed. I was blessed in giving to the poor. They were blessed because that was more than they would make in a week. I mean, it was just, and they didn't see it coming. They didn't expect it. That's just the goodness of God, how He works. We look at another passage of Scripture, Proverbs chapter 19, verse 17. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and He will repay him for his deed. That's a promise from God. That's ancient. That's thousands of years old. He says, hey, if you give to the poor, you're lending to me, and I will pay you back. So many times, zealous Christians will give us the impression that God needs your money. Have you ever considered before there were humans, He was doing just fine? I mean, He didn't need anything. He doesn't need your money today, but you need to give. He doesn't need your praise. He doesn't need your worship. To some of you, this sounds like heresy. He doesn't need it. He's fine. He is the all-sufficient one. That means He is without need whatsoever. However, we need to give. And when we start to give the way He tells us to give, we put ourselves in the cycle of God's blessings. And it's like the farmer. He sows seeds. He throws it out. He buries it in the ground in faith that the rains will come, that the seeds will break, they'll put up sprouts, they'll grow into trees, they'll grow into plants, they'll produce a harvest much greater than what was sown. This is the cycle. The farmer sows, he waits, he harvests, he gives, he buys seeds, he plants those seeds, he waits, they grow, he sells the harvest, he buys more seeds. It just keeps going. Stay in that cycle of giving because it takes faith. Most of you work very hard for your money. Many of you worked very hard for a long time. You don't have as much coming in as you used to. It takes more faith to give more and more, but you'll be blessed. If you give to the church, if you give as Abram did to Melchizedek, somebody who blessed him spiritually, I've given a lot to my mentors when I've been between churches. They help me grow spiritually. And as you give where God tells you to give, how He tells you to give, with a cheerful heart, you give bountifully, He's going to open all kinds of things up and bless you in every way, which is going to result in glory and thanksgiving to him. And he's going to keep his word. He's going to bless you back. So why should we give? Because of all the blessings we get. Some people say you should not give to get. That sounds nice, but would you tell a farmer, you don't need to plant corn to have corn next year? You don't have to plant wheat to have wheat next year. Well, I think they're seeds of money. I think the Bible uses all kinds of agricultural illustrations. You've heard you reap what you sow. Every thought is a seed. Every feeling is a seed. Every word is a seed. Every action is a seed. And those will take root and they'll grow. Better hope they're good. So we're constantly planting seeds. We don't plant agriculturally, but we're planting other kinds of seeds, and it still puts us in that cycle. And we give and we get. It's a predictable cycle. You wouldn't tell the farmer, don't plant your seeds. You'd say, yeah, do plant your seeds. That's how you get the harvest. So God will bless us with that. Once again, Luke 6:38, give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I'm going to wrap it up with a story today. God just dropped this in my lap. Good stories are hard to come by. And I'm so grateful. Every time Wednesdays roll around, I think, okay, God, some of these people have been with me for over 20 years. My 730 men's group, we're in our 23rd year now. I don't use the same illustrations all the time. God, I need some new stuff. And just by accident, I was looking for something else, and this popped up, and I was compelled, I'm going to give credit to the Holy Spirit, to watch this. You can watch thousands of things on YouTube that turn out being absolutely worthless. They know how to get your attention, but this was just delivered by God. I'm watching this video. This guy must have some kind of hidden camera on him, because the people in it, I'm pretty sure, were not actors. They were the real deal, and they didn't seem to be aware that they were being filmed. And so this guy's at a convenience store. What you see is a convenience store, big parking lot, a lot of people just hanging out there. You've been to those convenience stores where a lot of people are hanging out. They're very likely to ask you for some money. And you got people dumpster diving. This lady's walking by. He's got his bucket. And he said, excuse me, may I ask you a question? She said, what? And he said, would you rather have a job or alcohol? And she smiled and said, I've got a job. I'd like the alcohol. He tips the bucket toward her. It's got a sponge. It's got a brush. It's got a towel. It's got 2 bottles of Smirnoff vodka. Big bottles, 750 milliliters. And she said, oh, I'll take the alcohol. And he said, it's yours. Take it. She reached and grabbed it by the handle, and off she went, happy as she could be. He's thinking, that's not exactly who I'm looking for. And he looked over next to the garbage containers. There were about 4 or 5 dumpsters and some other city receptacles. And a lady was over there going through them. She had on blue jeans and a hoodie. She was covered up. She was bending over down deep in one of them, trying to get something. He walked up behind her, stayed about 8 or 10 feet behind, and said, excuse me, ma'am. She didn't turn around. He said, excuse me, ma'am, may I ask you a question? And she came up, turned around. He's got his bucket. He said, would you rather have a job or alcohol? And she kind of gave him that look like, that's a rude question. She said, a job. And he said, why would you choose the job? Do you not have a job? She said, no, I have a job, but it's not enough. Kind of going through a tough time. He said, would you be willing to work for me for about the next hour or so? She said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, I've got this stuff. It's a holiday. All the car washes are closed. Would you be willing to wash my car? I'll pay you well if you'll do it. And she said, yeah, I can do that. They get in this conversation. She's hoping that she'd find enough bottles and cans to get money to take public transportation home to her mother's house, who's keeping her 5-year-old son. So he says, so you're married, you got a son? No, I'm a single mom. So they're in this conversation, finds out that she wants some milk. He says, come on, let's go in the convenience store. They go to the milk counter. He said, listen, it's on me. Pick out whatever kind of milk you want. And she carefully looked at the gallon jugs and found the one with the farthest out date. She's frugal. She's paying attention. She's willing to work. He gets that, a couple other things for her. They go back out. He said, listen, I got to go do some work. If you'll wash this car, if you'll clean it up for me, I'll pay you well. So she washes the car. He comes back in about 30 minutes, less than that. She's got it clean. She really did a good job with it. He's so impressed with it. She starts talking with her a little bit more. Finds out that her husband died when their child was 2. She married at 17. She had a son. When he was 2, the father was killed. They were in a car wreck together. When she came to and looked for her husband, he was not in the car. He had been totally ejected from the car, died violently and instantly. And she's in tears now. She said, I just miss him. So sometimes I just expect him to be there. 3 years after the fact, still missing him. Said, and he's like me, he would do absolutely anything for his son. If I have to work 2 jobs for the rest of my life to take care of my son, I'm going to do it. Fortunately, my mother can take care of him when I'm out cleaning houses, which were her job. I just got to make more money. That's why I was looking for bottles and cans. I've got to make more money. And the man looks at the car, talks to her, and says, well, I want to pay you. He reaches in his pocket. He pulls out some bills that are folded in half. I went to my change drawer and pulled out some 1s and 5s and 10s just to get a stack that would look about like his. It was probably between 25 and 30 bills. The one on top was 100. So he's got this thick pile of bills with a rubber band around them. He hands it to her and said, this is for you. She sees that 100 on top and said, I can't take that. He said, well, you earned it. You worked for it. You cleaned my car. She said, that's too much. I can't take it. And he talked her into it. He finally had to say, listen, this is what I do. I'm very wealthy. All of my businesses are thriving. I've got more money than what I do with. And I enjoy finding people who are having a tough time, who are good people, who try and take care of their child, and they're willing to work. I really want you to take. She took it. And he said, could I ask you for one more favor? She said, what? He said, could you wash that car behind it? She said, yeah, I got 30 minutes till I have to catch the bus. I think I can get it done. He said, would you do it for free? She looked at the money and said, absolutely. As much as you've paid me? Sure. She's still real teary. He goes away, comes back out and said, listen, I just spoke with my team. Here's some information about them. And I told you I wanted to bless you. I've paid you. You were willing to wash this car for free. The reason I wanted to wash it, do you know why I wanted you to wash this car? And she said, no. I said, well, it's your car. And he dangles the keys. It was a 2024 black Cadillac SUV, black tan leather, fully loaded. My guys, my team are taking care of the paperwork. I'm paying for 3 years of insurance for you. You got enough money in your hand to catch you up on all your rent. You've got a car to find yourself some more work. And here's my number. If ever you need help, you let me know, because you're a good person. This man didn't talk about Jesus. He didn't talk about God. I don't know that he has any kind of faith at all, but this man had discovered the joy of giving. Giving is fun. Just think about, where could you give? If you don't have a lot of money, that's really okay. God will bless it. If you could just afford $1 for some homeless person that looks like they really need it, that they're not a con artist, that's good. Everybody needs a smile. Everybody needs encouraging words. Everybody needs to be listened to. Everybody needs to be heard. There are so many ways you can give, and the benefits of giving. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, poured into your laps.